and welcome to the Rally Point with Dominic Fielder, the author of the King's German series, and myself, Rob McLaren, the author of the Jobert series. Hello, Dominic Fielder. How are you?
Very well, Rob. How are things with you?
Superb. Absolutely marvellous. Each month at the Rally Point, we catch up with friends who enjoy the Napoleonic period. Now, everyone, we're recording the first 30 minutes of the gathering, but once the recording is over, we remain online, and the conversation continues. And this month, we would like to welcome Keith Rocco to the Rally Point. Keith is a military painter, specializing in areas such as the American Revolution, Napoleonic period, the American Civil War, and World War II. I'm surrounded by some of my art by Keith, the veteran, and the rear guard there behind us, and flaunting one of his latest marvelous books that he together with Paul L. Dawson. So Keith is with us. How are you, Keith? Over to you, Dominic.
Good. Good. Looking forward to this.
Hello, Keith. Keith, look, I'm going to confess straight up, my drawing and artwork is appalling. I am, a stick virtuoso person when it comes to artwork. I want you to tell me the creative process. I imagine that there's lots of research, but just how do you do it? How do you produce such a high volume of outstanding work?
Well, thanks for the compliment. The process for me is, like many people, begins with inspiration, and that inspiration can come from anything as such as a memoir or a letter or the reading of a book. Like most people, as you're reading, you have this movie going on in your head. And as an artist, I freeze frame that. It's something I find inspirational and that I want to create a visual image of. And once I've decided on that subject, then the work of the research and the atmosphere and the composition begins.
And has the process evolved over a period of time, or did you sort of strike on it early on and you've been perfecting it ever since? How have things developed?
I think it hasn't changed much from the beginning. But I have perfected it or improved it, let's say. I don't think it's perfect, but I've continued to improve on that. I've been fortunate in meeting a lot of nice, generous people at museums and private collectors and book collectors and people that have been very generous with their knowledge and their collections, so that over the years I can actually produce more artwork in a year than I could when I first started, because before I would get log jammed on a question, something that was needed to complete the painting, where now today I know somebody who maybe is a expert in that area and can get me out of that log jam relatively quick.
And so looking at the new work that you've been doing around D-Day, I mean, really important work that is just going to be there for the span of human history. How did you approach those topics, the things you've decided to make art on?
That was a subject that first of all was very close to my heart, because my father was a World War II veteran. And he served in the European theater. He was not at D-Day, but I had a great admiration for his service. And also the museum that the paintings were at was a museum that was the first military museum I ever visited at 10 years old. So in 1965, my father took me to Wheaton, Illinois, which was outside of Chicago, which is where I grew up. And I was just flabbergasted and in awe of this museum. And by serendipity or fate or whatever, almost 50 years later, I get a call from the museum and return there to paint these two murals of D-Day. And the museum is the 1st Division Museum, which, as you know, was one of the two divisions, infantry divisions, that landed at Omaha Beach.
are you finding that artwork as your the things that you've put for D-Day? We were having a sort of a little conversation before this, and I was struck by a point that Hans Carl made about say it's not just the composition anymore. It's about how people are stood and how everything has a meaning. Do you find you're having to really think about the meaning of the images that you're putting together? That are people reading something new into modern artwork, do you think, or modern designs?
Yeah, I hope so. Well, probably all of us here are deeply interested in history, and it could probably give a lecture on their own. But there's a huge proportion of the public that has no concept of what went on. So I feel, especially with all my artwork, but I feel since we're talking about the D-Day murals, that there was a responsibility to represent accurately and educate the general public about this climactic event. I find that with all my paintings, I try to strive that someone will look at the painting, and though they may not be knowledgeable of the period, they'll find no anachronisms in the painting. Everything will look that it belongs in that period and is accurate to the period. Even if they don't have the knowledge of it, they'll see no anachronisms. Take D-Day for example. Most of the paintings that were produced 10 years after D-Day, or within that 10-year period, were mostly produced by veterans or combat artists. And so I think that there was a high emotional value running through them as they were producing these paintings. I mean, they vividly lived through many of these episodes, where I don't have that. I don't have that. What do I want to say? That experience, and so I'm looking at it much more analytical. Not that I want it to be emotionally touching for anyone that views the paintings. I certainly do, and as I read more memoirs and things like that to prepare for something like the D-Day diorama, it is emotional. I mean, it's hard not to be. You'd have to be a stone when you read some of these memoirs to not feel for these people. So I'm approaching it in two different roads. One from an emotional response from the viewer and trying to translate what I have read visually, but also from the road of historical accuracy, so that whatever is shown in the painting is accurate and gives you a period feel to the painting and the subject.
The beauty of this hobby and the beauty of history is we all have our own ideas. How do you cope with this? The information that you must get in from people who say, "Oh, this was the wrong color. That was the wrong. They never used that particular bobble." I mean, you must have had years of that sort of feedback. That would drive me mad. How have you managed to get your way through that?
When I first started, it really used to upset me. It would drive me crazy. But I have faith in my research. I have faith in the people that I contact to help me with the research. I usually double check and triple check things. Often there's some mistakes slip through the cracks. I've painted over 600 paintings now, historical subjects to date. Yeah, I'm sure there's some mistakes in there, and a couple that I even know that I would admit to. But all kidding aside, I just have to put that aside, and it doesn't happen frequently. So that's good. So that must mean that at least I'm getting 99% of it right, because most people can't find a fault.
Because I mean, I'm looking at your pieces, and as soon as I see them out there, I know it's you. I know it's your artwork. That's
thanks. That means a lot.
Well, no, you aren't that well known. That I'm looking at it and thinking, it's you.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because people often say they can spot my painting across the room, and so I love that. It's a wonderful compliment, because that means that I've developed a style that is uniquely mine over decades of painting. I mean, nothing is created in a vacuum. And so I credit the number of 19th century artists that I emulated and admired. And so I think part of my kit bag of Rocco tricks is pieces and elements of these 6 or 8 artists that when I was younger I studied on my own. I did go to college for 3 years, went to a state school and studied art there. But this was in the early 70s, and at that time, all the teachers at this school, at least, were teaching non-representational art. In fact, I took a drawing class where the first day the professor said, "I don't want to see anything that looks like anything."
Very cool.
So I knew I was in trouble.
Keith, I could have been in that class.
Yeah, there you go.
It's the one class I could have made it in.
Right. After 3 years of that, I ended up dropping out of college, and I didn't paint for a number of years because I felt like when I was there, I felt like I was a dinosaur. Because I wanted to paint something that looked like something, and so I didn't paint for a number of years, and then I discovered Howard Pyle, an American illustrator, father of American illustration. And that got me fired up again. And I, of course, had missed painting. And so that began my journey that's brought me to today in historical art. So I mentioned Howard Pyle, but really the man that I believe and many people have credited with the beginning the genre of historical art is this fellow, Ernest Messonnier. He was born in 1815, the same year that Napoleon abdicated his throne for the final time. And but in France in the 1830s under Louis Philippe, there was this resurgence in the interest of the history of France. And Messonnier embraced that idea, but he wasn't going to do paintings that had been passed along as historical subjects before with lots of anachronisms that we spoke about earlier. He was going to do a deep study of whatever subject he was going to paint, as far as the costuming, the atmosphere, the material culture of the period. And so here we have a piece from his painting Friedland, and beautiful piece. Where you could see all of the details are just so right and so perfect. So from Messonnier, his idea of historical art carried on through the French next generation, through mainly Edouard de Taille and Alphonse de Neuville, but it did cross the Atlantic sometime in the 1870s and influenced painters such as this gentleman, which is a Frederick Remington painting. Remington was very much self-centered and a real promoter of himself, but he did admit to having owned a print of de Neuville's, one of his subjects that he found very inspirational, and I think did influence some of his work and the progression of his story. This painting, it also influenced another American painter, and this is the guy I was mentioning earlier, Howard Pyle. Howard Pyle is the acknowledged father of American illustration, but he embraced this idea of Messonnier's deep research into creating paintings that are no anachronisms. Every detail is this is his painting of the attack on the Chew House during the American Revolution. And I love this guy's painting. His work is probably, out of all the historical artists of the 19th century that I admired, his was really the first one that influenced me greatly, and this painting in particular. So by the 1870s, in the world in general, Impressionism is very much on the rise and is starting to replace historical art as the main subject or main genre that the public is really interested in. But sometime around the 1880s, a new genre, or I should say an old genre, is embraces a new genre in the United States. And the idea of the cyclorama, these massive yard-long, yard-high paintings depicting mostly historical scenes. The first painting, by the way, the first cyclorama was actually done in 1787 by a Scotsman, where he painted a view of Carlton Hill in central Edinburgh, Scotland. But that genre became popular in Europe for quite a while, with over 120 120 cycloramas in the United States, panoramas in the rest of the world. Were created between 1797 and 1863. 120 of them. That's quite a few. So as far as the subject went, during this resurgence of cyclorama in the United States had just come out of the American Civil War, so that was a ripe field for these cycloramas and a fitting subject for these teams of painters to execute. So there were cycloramas on the battles of Shiloh, Vicksburg, Chattanooga, Bull Run, Gettysburg. Actually, there were 4 versions of the painting of Gettysburg. It was so popular that Philippe Poutot, his team created 3 copies of the original so that it could tour the world at the same time. So a friend, author friend, found this for me in the Scientific American magazine. It was such a popular subject in the United States that this magazine, which was a big seller at the time in the 1880s, did this whole article on the creation of the cyclorama. So here you can see the a cutaway of how these cycloramas were arranged. This can you see my cursor?
Yes.
It does. Okay. So this is the ambient light. This is a screen that is throwing that ambient light down along the walls of the cyclorama. And then here is the viewing platform. The cycloramas, they were first drawn out into sections, and you can see here like this. Each piece is numbered. Here's J4, J5, J6. Each of these was approximately, I think it was 1 foot square. And this would be the pen and ink drawing in the first plan of the panorama. From this, then, they would bring in costume models to get the details of the uniform and the hang of the clothes correct. And then the cyclorama the canvas would be hung in these huge buildings. And these large platforms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 almost 7 stories tall would be set up on railroad tracks in a circular fashion. And then as the painting progressed, they would push this platform along down the railroad, and they would continue painting the next section. It's interesting. I found this drawing really interesting. You would never see this exist in today. There's no railing, no safety net, just hanging out there on the platform about 30 feet above the ground, painting away. So here you get a good feel of the size and the shape of the cyclorama. This is the Vale of Atlanta cyclorama being restored. And an interesting note of this is at the bottom here, you see this iron ring. And there's another iron ring along this top edge. And what it does is when the painting is hung and stretched, it makes this convex shape so that the center of the painting, where the viewing platform is looking directly at, is closest to you. So the sky and the groundwork below falls away, and the details of the middle painting become more vivid. So here's a period photograph of the cyclorama Raisonville by Philippe Poutot and de Neuville under construction. And here you can see all of those elements, the large platform, Some officers obviously coming to visit and see how the progress is coming along. The large ladders for accessing the top rung to continue hanging the canvas. And right here, if you barely see it because the exposure is poor, but this is the next piece of canvas ready to be hoisted by this block and tackle into position and then hung onto those iron bars. So as they're finishing this piece, they're then preparing to continue on. I don't have a photograph of it, but there were smaller paintings. When I say smaller, they were about 4 feet high by 20 feet long that were used for reference material for these various artists to follow for the final large canvas. So here's a team. This is Philippe Pouteau's team of painters. And this is the Gettysburg cyclorama that's behind them. So you can see how many artists were involved. There'd be specialists. Some men were strictly the horse painters. Some men strictly landscape. Others carriages or figures. And this fellow, I think here, this guy right here, this much older gentleman, I think is a veteran who has come to advise on the accuracy of the painting. It's known that General Hancock came and visited the painting, gave his when it was in progress, giving his views on the accuracy and what should be changed or adjusted. But I think that this guy is definitely one of the veterans because you can see his Civil War cap sitting here on the edge of the platform. So I think he's one of the visiting advisors. At least that's my story. So here's an interesting view of the canvas being rolled out and now stretched in one of the exhibit cities. It's interesting, they hired sailors of the time because they were adept at hanging canvas. They hung sails, large sheets of sails on ships, so they were the perfect go-to crew to hang these large canvases. So here they are tacking it in place onto that top bar, and then this fellow and this fellow are turning this huge crank that's rolling out the canvas. So many large cities around the world had cyclorama buildings. In fact, there was a cyclorama building in Melbourne. There was one in Tokyo. There were ones in Germany, in France, in the United States. This is a photograph of Chicago. It had 2 cyclorama buildings competing right across the street from each other. And if you can't see it here, but one of these blown up, it is the Gettysburg cyclorama that's being shown. So by the early 1890s, late 1890s, the cyclorama began to disappear because Thomas Edison's moving pictures had come into vogue, and people were far more interested in seeing moving pictures than a still painting. And so today there's only about, I think there's an estimated 30 cycloramas that still exist. The others were all either destroyed, rotted away in warehouses, or were cut up for portions to be sold at auction. But today the idea of the cyclorama continues in museums, in this concept of you are their experience, where you enter into this life-size exhibit. And the first of these that I painted, let me get my notes here so I'm not telling you a lie. Okay. There we go. So the first commission for us for a large scale painting, which I had never done before, I was more of a studio painter, smaller pieces, was from the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. They had seen this painting, the designer had seen this painting through the cornfield, which I painted back in 1987. And they were creating a life-size exhibit of the Iron Brigade, which is these troops, going through the cornfield at Antietam with life-size mannequins, and they needed a life-size backdrop to complete the exhibit. I had never painted anything this large. The wall was about 25 feet long by 12 feet tall, but it sounded really exciting to me, so I took it on. And this is as it exists today at the museum. You can see these are the life-size mannequins, and then here's a portion of my miniature cyclorama that arcs out this way. There were three paintings in that Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Two of them were one was Civil War subject, pardon me, and the other two were World War II. This one was depicting an episode in the Battle of the Bulge, and this was the backdrop for a life-size diorama of figures and equipment in the foreground. And there you see the painting in the background, and then the full-scale diorama. So you can see I started out kind of small with my my large-scale painting. The next museum that came along asking for some work was Pamplin Park. It's the National Museum of the Civil War Soldier. And this was 2 years after the Wisconsin Veterans Museum project. The assistant curator at the first museum had left to go to Pamplin Park, had seen my work at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, and asked if I'd be interested in doing work at their museum. So this was a much more grander scale. You could see here this painting, which was one of 6, was 59 feet long and approximately 18 feet tall on this edge. And the thrust of the museum was to show the commonality between the soldiers of the North and the South. So we decided on the subject being 1861, where we could show units in various colored uniforms, which would have been representative of militia, both north and south of the Mason-Dixon line. So once these drawings were created and approved, then came the work of bringing in individual figures, costumes, to start creating the different elements, which you can see that little piece right here is now the final drawing, which is here. A color study similar to what was done for the cycloramas was created because I needed help with the project. It was too big for me to paint alone, so I brought in 2 scenic painters from Hollywood. This was still at a time when there was no CGI, and so the backdrops for Hollywood film productions were hand painted. So these 2 gentlemen that came out from Los Angeles were experienced backdrop painters in the film industry. So this little subject painting, which is about 18 inches wide by a foot tall, is what they used to reproduce in a large scale. And then I was responsible for all of the horse flesh and all of the figures in the painting. So there to show without a shadow of a doubt that I actually painted this. There I am working away on the camp scene. You saw the drawing of this earlier. Gives you a good idea of the scale of the figures. And I put this in to show you more or less the roughness of the painting. I should have commented on that when I showed you the image of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. It was interesting at Wisconsin the first few days because I was so used to painting small canvases in the studio. Well, here I'm now in front of a large wall, and the viewing distance is 16 feet behind me. That's the closest the visitor is going to get. So for the first couple of days, I was happily painting along with my small studio brushes. And then I would back up to the 16-foot mark, and I couldn't see a darn thing that I had painted. And so I got rid of all those little brushes and went for the half-inch, 1-inch, 2-inch, 3-inch brushes. So you can see how loose the paint work is, especially like in this area, these figures marching by. But at 16 or 20 feet distance, it all pulls together, similar to a large painting being reduced for a magazine cover. So there is the final composition of the wall. and the life-size figures and other objects in the foreground to draw the viewer into the scene. And these little blue markers are interesting. When you enter the museum at Pamplin Park, you're given a headset, and you have a choice of following one soldier. There's 6 Union soldiers to choose from and 6 Confederate soldiers to choose from. So as you go through, you can click on these and it'll tell you episodes in that soldier's life. The next museum, large-scale museum, was the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum in Springfield, Illinois. This one came right on the heels of the Pamplin Park Museum, and I really vacillated on if I was going to do it because the Pamplin Park one had been 6 months, 7 months of my life living in a hotel, and it was really a construction site. In fact, while I was working on this painting, on the other side of the wall, the construction workers were pounding nails into the other exhibit, so that the walls literally vibrating as a trying to paint. So I felt that I wasn't that keen on going through that experience again. So we worked out a system where I was creating 2 paintings for this museum. One, this piece, Black Soldiers Go to War, which is 25 feet tall by 16 feet wide. And then another one, which was a panorama allegorical scene of the Battle of Gettysburg, ending with Abraham Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address. So the thought was I would paint these in the studio as large canvases. Then these pieces would be shipped out to California to a scenic backdrop painting company. They would reproduce it on canvas full size. It would be shipped to the museum, excuse me, glued onto the wall, and then I would go to the museum and work there for a month, fine-tuning the painting. So there's the full-size painting at the museum based on this smaller studio painting. This was the other piece in that museum, in the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum, the Battle of Gettysburg. It starts out over here with the battle for Cemetery Hill, and this is the cemetery gate. Then allegorically, it morphs over to the initial, there we go, to the initial interment of the dead with simple wooden boards with the soldier's name on it, to the relatives of those soldiers visiting the cemetery, and then to the dedication of a more formal, organized national cemetery and Abraham Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address. And then along the top of that panorama, which is, I think, 65 feet long, is the Gettysburg Address. It works because when you enter into the room, you enter on this side. And so because it's a horseshoe, all you can see is the battle. And so as you go into the room, then the whole painting is revealed and you end up looking back towards the Gettysburg Address. So that brings us to the latest museum piece that I've worked on, and that's at the First Division Museum in Wheaton, Illinois. We spoke a little earlier that the First Division was one of the 2 divisions that assaulted Omaha Beach, the First Division and the 29th Infantry Division, along with support troops. The project was to revamp the gallery that was D-Day. Which brings me then to this fascinating photograph, which is me when I was 10 years old. Wheaton, Illinois was the first military museum that I had ever been to, and it was greatly influenced my future, obviously. I was so taken by the museum. The museum at that time was a very small little white building that was maybe 4,000 square feet. Well, in around 2010, the museum expanded to a museum of almost 20,000 square feet. And the D-Day gallery is one of the central highlights of the museum, if not the highlight. So I was first asked to refurbish an existing mural. The museum direction had changed, where before you would walk into this gallery and all was peaceful. There were no figures. It was D-Day plus 5, 6, 7 days, and the whole story of the landing was told before you entered into the gallery onto this beach scene. The new administration wanted to change that and to have the introductory film end just before the landing. And so with that, they wanted to show the battle in progress. And so two murals were going to be, or two wall areas were going to be revamped as murals depicting that action. At first, I was commissioned just to do this one wall. And so this was the curator of the museum at the First Division. I met him at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, that first museum I had worked on. He was just coming in as an assistant curator, and I was just finishing up my work leaving. Well, he remembered me for whatever it was, 20 plus years later, and called me up and asked if I'd be interested in doing this. And knowing my affinity for Cantini and its place in my personal story, I said yes, absolutely, I would love to do that. So I went out there in 2019 to get an overview of what the work was, what the work involved. While I was there, I made these large tracings. This is film. This is acetate film from this white tape line to down here at the bottom, to outline all the ships, all of the objects that I was going to either paint around or completely eradicate. All the ships that are in this initial mural are pretty inaccurate. So all the boats, all the ships are going to go away. They wanted to save the hedgehogs, and so place the troops in between. So there's a good detailed shot of that. There's the white tape, the acetate, and the black Sharpie tracing of the objects. So at the same time that I rolled up that acetate and took it back to the studio, the research that we spoke about earlier began. So the beauty, I guess, if there's something beautiful about World War II from a historical side, is there's a lot of film footage and still photography. So there's a pretty good plethora of photographic research readily available. Here's a combat medic team of a special engineer brigade. They're special engineers, you can tell by the rocker on their helmet. I'm sure we've all seen this picture 100 times, but there's really lots of interesting information in it. You see, and just to point out a few things really quickly, you see used bags on these two gentlemen here. There's a assault vest on this fellow, and on this guy, and on this fellow. This fellow, that guy, and this one over here are wearing model 1928 packs. You see the Navy, what they call the assault vest, was actually, pardon me, not assault vest, a life vest, what was actually a life belt. These are little black tubes that you could blow into to inflate it if the gas canisters did not operate correctly. So using this, I could make the figures that I was going to paint, give them a little bit of individuality by changing up their equipment and the combinations of equipment. There's another fellow on one of the landing craft on June 6th, surrounded by various equipment that was used during the assault. Those life belts were strapped onto everything, as you see here and here on this pack, to help things float if they weren't dragged in by an infantryman. The thought was that, well, it would float in. Here he's wearing one around his waist. He wears the assault vest that was issued to them just days before D-Day. Here's an explosive charge on a long pole, and of course a bazooka over here. And another nice little detail scrim on the helmet. Another thing that I could use later on to individualize some of the characters, so they don't look all cookie cutter. These three gentlemen are of the Combat Engineer Special Brigade, which actually assaulted the beaches before the infantry. Their job was to destroy any obstacles. These being infantrymen, their job was to destroy obstacles on the beach. There was also naval demolition teams, which were to destroy obstacles that were in the water. This photo has lots of great information in it. Satchel charges, that's what these are here. The primacord, which was used, rolls of it that were used to connect the demolition charges. They're carrying Bangalore torpedoes. Here's the head of one, which had the charge in it, and these would be screwed together and then slipped under barbed wire and other obstacles, and then detonated. These gas mask bags, which were unique to D-Day. In this photograph, there is more personal story to it. One of these gentlemen was killed on June 6th on the beach during the assault. Another one was killed a month later in the Normandy blockade, and one survived the war. Then a collection of uniforms. Working on the drawings, I was collecting reproduction and original items. This is not my stuff, but it gives you a good example of what I used. I have upstairs in the studio a full mannequin of all of that collected research material, and it's important to use things like this because because of the material they're made out of, they have different weights and the way they hang on the belts and hang on the human body. I also hired 3 model makers to make models of some of the vehicles and the shipping that was going to be depicted in the painting. So here's a 1/32 scale Sherman tank with the breathers, and then landing craft infantry model ship that you can see was used to replicate this ship right here, LCI 490. Taken verbatim from that photograph. So at that point, now that I have all that research done together, I started creating the small drawing that was going to be sent to the museum for their approval. So here was that ship that we were just looking at. It's back here. These are the existing hedgehogs, obstacles on the beach, with the addition of some of the pole logs, obstacles that landing craft were. German idea was that they would run up onto these rafts and either tip over, or there would be mines attached to these logs that would detonate when a ship hit it. Here's a 3-man team of the 322nd Barrage Balloon Battalion, the only African-American troops that landed on D-Day, and the various shipping that would be added to the murals and covering up the existing paintings. While I was creating that one, the museum decided, hey, while we're at it, how would you like to do a second mural? And so I said sure to that. And this was the other wall scene that was going to be the centerpiece of it was going to be a medical aid station. And this is the drawing that was created for that section of it. The medic aid station is right here, and then with the other elements you can read on there: Sherman DD tank, LCV debarking infantry, additional obstacles. Ray's Rock is an interesting element. Ray's Rock is there today. If you go to Normandy, you can see it. There's a large brass plaque that sits on it right here to the medical battalion of the medical contingent of the 3rd Infantry Battalion of the 1st Division. behind Ray's Rock, why this is so important, was a piece of concrete that was left by the, the Germans during the construction of the obstacles. And when Ray landed with the first wave on Omaha Beach, he, being a medic, looked for some place that he could drag the wounded, and he spotted this large chunk of concrete on this barren landscape of beach, and that became the first triage center for American wounded GIs and engineers. So at this point, now with the drawings approved, I bring in the custom models. And so here's one of those figures. He's posing for one of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion men. This is the reel that they use to connect to the very low altitude barrage balloons. There was a definite worry that the Luftwaffe was going to show up in force on D-Day, and what a rich target environment the beaches showed to the German aircraft. And so barrage balloons were employed to keep the German aircraft above accurate range. Another model shot for the second D-Day mural. And here now is one of those model shots is created these individual drawings of characters that are then incorporated into the larger drawing fitted in here. So this is shot inside the studio of the full scale drawing that's going to be transferred to the walls of the museum. This is the June 6th mural. As you can see, the action is still going on, and here's men coming off the landing craft. Photo research. Off to the side over here is the drawing that I'm following for composition. Once these two drawings were done, they were taken down, and then the actual painting began. So here's day one at the museum. The mural is going to be the June 7th scene, the day after D-Day, D-Day +1. Here's that drawing that was sent to the museum. And then this here is a covered element of the museum that couldn't be removed from the wall. It's a hedgehog. And then the platform that was built to work off of, to level off the groundwork. At this point, the museum decided that, you know, those hedgehogs are really in too close. We need to paint those out and move them further into the distance, which completely threw off the composition that I had created. So I ended up chopping up the composition and repainting out this section that you see here. All of those were painted out. So you can see they're in the process of disappearing. And they'll be moved to the back. And then the drawing was chopped apart and then recomposed to fit the new landscape. Here now you can see they're completely gone. And details to the surf and the beach are now laid in. So here's the recomposed layout of the composition. I used a number of period of photographs and lifted them, or I should say, lifted them and placed them directly into the painting. This one of this LCT US 25 is a famous one that was photographed many times. It was hit numerous times by German artillery, and eventually was completely destroyed and just floated into the beach. This is the detail of the painting in progress, and here you can see one of the figures that's ready to be painted, inked in with burnt umber. And in this grouping, I'd like to point out this one fellow, Ernie Pyle, who was an American war correspondent, beloved by the guys in the field. He slept, ate, and experienced what they experienced, all but frontline combat. Ernie Pyle was probably the best known U.S. war correspondent, and he arrived with other correspondents on the beaches of D-Day. He arrived a day later because of complications with his landing craft. But there were several correspondents that landed on D-Day and wrote some very stirring stories. And Ernie Pyle's piece that he wrote that appeared in newspapers across the United States shortly after D-Day is really compelling. Here's the almost completed section of the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. These were placed on the section of the beaches. This depicts Easy Red. So ships coming in that are assigned to land at Easy Red have a marker that they can spot and know where to bring their ships in. You can see the painting's not quite finished. Here's the another spool of wire and the feet and the bags, and his laces are not in yet, just inked in and progressing along. So here's that US 25 landing craft with one of the destroyed half tracks with the quad 50 machine guns mounted on top of it. So I took it as such an identifiable piece of D-Day history that I wanted to have it in the painting. And so here it is shown in color. And you can also see in here how far back the hedgehogs have now been pushed out into the surf. I found this figure really poignant. We were talking about expressing the emotions of the subjects. I found this fellow probably one of the most pathetic figures that I come across in photography of D-Day, and I wanted to somehow reproduce him in the painting. And so I had one of the models pose for this, and this is what I came up with. And he's landing on the beach on the June 7th D-Day mural, right there. And so here's the mural, just about completely done. Some of the reference material here, one of the life vests, ammunition cans. Off to the side, out of frame, was that mannequin that's in the studio now with all the infantry equipment that was worn on D-Day. Here's some of the working conditions. You can see here is I'm up about 12 feet off the ground on this little wood platform, working on the June 6th D-Day mural. And this shows the process of transferring. This is Sorel transfer paper, which is a graphite paper. This happens to be blue. And here I've got the drawing taped into place, a full size, and tracing that figure out to reproduce it onto the wall so it'll be ready to paint. Here you can see the trace line. Blow that up. There we go. Here you can see the trace line from that drawing. And then the model photo reference. And then the figure in progress. And this easel here, pardon me, this palette here gives you an idea of the size of the figure. So every figure in the mural went under that three-step process. Taping, tracing, inking in with a dark color. I should mention that I inked these in because this line is fugitive. It's chalk. If I hit that with turpentine, the line's gone. So once it's traced in, it has to be then inked in so that the line is permanent. Yeah, such here. Here's the blue line, the inked in figure. And then once that dries, then I start painting in the figure. This amount of painting right here represents about 6 hours worth of work. That figure is about 30 inches tall from top of his helmet to his knee. Here's one of those photo references for this group right here to be painted next. The notes on the wall, so I'm very forgetful, so I write myself copious Post-it notes and stick them all over the wall, so I remember to come back and finish things. This landing craft is also a famous photograph from D-Day. It looks like it's a boat that's been hit by a shell, but it was actually a bullet hit a smoke grenade on one of the men inside the boat, exploding the smoke grenade, and that's what's pouring out of the landing craft. And again, here you can see the roughness of the painting. But again, when you back up to that viewing distance, it all tightens up very nicely. There's two portraits in the whole project. One in the D-Day June 6th painting, and one in the June 7th, Ernie Pyle. The June 6th one is this gentleman, Charles Shea. Charles Shea was a medic, and he was actually a Native American. He was a Penobscot Indian, and he now lives in France. I believe he is still alive. I think he just turned 100. His portrait appears in the June 6th mural. This gentleman, he's not in the painting, but I wanted to put him in the presentation because this was Charles Shea's best friend. He was also a medic, and he was killed on D-Day. He was eviscerated by a shell or shrapnel, and died in Charles Shea's arms. Eddie Morowitz is his name, a fresh-faced 18-year-old. So there's the portrait of Charles Shea working on bandaging this this officer who's lost a foot. I lied. There's two portraits in the painting. I forgot about Waverly Woodson. Waverly Woodson was also a medic. He was with the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion, but the Barrage Balloon Battalion was spread out over both Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. In fact, I needed so many barrage balloons that a 6-man team was divided into only 3-man teams, so they could get double the amount of barrage balloons up. Waverly Woodson was wounded on the way in his landing craft. He was hit in the thigh and in the rear end by shrapnel from a German artillery shell, but he bandaged himself up and worked for 30 straight hours, saving what is, some say, 200 men, doing amputation as well, and dragging men out of the surf and bringing them up to triage areas closer by the cliff. He eventually collapsed after 30 hours, and he was awarded eventually, only recently, the not the Medal of Honor, but the Distinguished Service Cross. This gentleman, he's in the painting as well, but not as a portrait. This is Jimmy Monteith. In fact, he's a Virginian from the state where I live now. Jimmy Monteith was a second lieutenant at the time of D-Day, and through his actions, he ended up winning the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously. He under great duress organized his men and got up the bluffs until they were stopped by German opposition and obstacles. He went back down to the beach through a minefield to find a Sherman tank that was wandering around the beach looking for targets. He directed the Sherman tank, or led it back through the minefield, leading the way for the Sherman tank to take out these two obstacles. Later in the day, he was killed by German machine gun fire in an attempt to organize a defense against a German counterattack. So he appears here directing that Sherman tank up the bluff and against those obstacles. So here's the entire mural in 3 sections. It is 20 feet long The area that I painted was 10 feet tall. And just like the other one, all the incorrect ships were taken out, and correct ship numbers and correct types of ships were put into the painting. Here we see one that's been hit and flaming, the survivors staggering to the beach. There's Waverly Woodson. Landing craft that's just unloaded its 31 man assault team. The medical triage, which is the centerpiece of the mural. You can see here, following this line right here, those are actual stones, three-dimensional stones. And then this is the painted area, which I think blends pretty well. And we move along to Jimmy Monteith, and then up towards the bluff. And then the first infantryman, U.S. infantryman, starting to scale the cliffs and get onto the top of the bluffs. So this is Ernie Pyle. We were talking about him earlier, and I'd like to end this with a little caption of what he had, a portion of what he had written for his newspaper articles, what he observed on June 7th. So he writes, "I took a walk along the historic coast of Normandy in the country of France. It was a lovely day for strolling along the seashore. Men were sleeping on the sand, some of them sleeping forever. I walked for a mile and a half along our many-miled invasion beach. You wanted to walk slowly, for the detail on that beach was infinite. The wreckage was vast and startling. The awful waste and destruction of war, even aside from the loss of human life, has always been one of its outstanding features to those who are in it. Anything and everything is expendable. On the beach itself, high and dry, were all kinds of wrecked vehicles. There were tanks that had only just made the beach before being knocked out. There were LCTs turned completely upside down and lying on their backs, and how they got that way, I do not know. In the water floated empty life rafts and soldiers' packs and ration boxes and mysterious oranges. But there's another and more human litter. It extends in a thin little line, just like a high water mark, for miles along the beach. Here is a jumbled row for mile on mile of soldiers' packs. Here are socks and shoe polish, sewing kits, diaries, Bibles, and hand grenades. As I plowed out over the wet sand of the beach on that first day ashore, I walked around what seemed to be a couple of pieces of driftwood. But they weren't driftwood. They were a soldier's 2 feet. He was completely covered by the shifting sands except for his feet. The toes of his GI shoes pointed towards the land he had come so far to see, and which he saw so briefly." Well, thanks, gentlemen. I'd love to answer any questions that you might have. I know we answered a few earlier.
Thank you for that, Keith. That was amazing. That genuinely was. Just to see how you'd taken the artwork that was there and made it something highly personal, but personal to those people.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Fascinating conversation so far. I'm about to end our recording, but please stay online as we continue our chat. To wrap up this month's Rally Point, thank you, Mr. Keith Rocco, for joining us. Thank you, Keith.
Yep, thank you, Keith.
Very much. Thanks for the invitation.
For those of you who have joined us live this evening, thank you for your time with us. And next time, why not join us here at the Rally Point next month when we catch up with Dr. Stephen Somerville. Simply contact Dominic and I for your Zoom invite. Our details are at the end of the video, and share Rally Point with your friends so we can hear from them as well. Now, any previous Rally Point chats are up on our YouTube channel. If you've enjoyed this Rally Point, please leave a quick review. So it's good morning from me, and it's good night from him.
Good night.